we should start. Let's spend a minute or so on logistical announcements. So thanks to most of you who have already submitted your project proposals. And yes, apologies, I should have mentioned email is fine. Anything that can cut down on paper is awesome for this class. So that's one. And if you have any urgent questions or things about either writing the project proposal or your content, just hang out after class or sometime, or ping me and then we can talk about it. And the second thing is that, don't look at this yet. The second thing is about the blog post. I think, so from this week onwards, we will have more than one person posting a blog post. And I think that, and I wanted to remind all of you to just read and then comment. And I want to say a little bit about the commenting side of things and why I wanted to put this as a criteria. So basically, blog posts, if it's not a criteria, probably most of us won't even read it, maybe even including myself. I didn't have to grade it. But I think that it's a good array, for you to, a wide topic, because ICTD is so big that if you just read it and just comment, and what I'm asking for, as I've mentioned to most of you, is just sort of a cursory, yes, this is useful for me because, and just a 2-sentence thing, that's fine. So I don't want you to spend too much time on it. In actual fact, for each blog post, you shouldn't be spending more than 3 hours writing it, and the comment should not take you more than 15 minutes. Don't do extra research unless you really want to, right? And you're just being graded on participation, not necessarily on, sophisticated findings. Got it? For the blog post? So when there are 3 blog posts, what I would like to see is you commenting on at least one of them. Cool? Okay. So with that, are there any questions on blog posts, assignments, project proposals, etc.? Yeah.
There are project proposals need to be
email?
Oh, email.
Yes.
Okay. Every email us, but
no problem, just email it after class. I know, I should have made that clear. I was just saying this is the first time I've actually taught the entire class paperless, so I didn't make the announcement. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so with that, let's go into, we have quite a lot of ground to cover today, and I wanted to point us to where we are. Okay, so, whoa, whatever happened to my... Okay, so I want to point us to where we are in terms of the class. You remember this conceptual framework for the... Carol, would you mind just closing the door but keep it ajar? So again, we're going back to our framework of conceptual, technical, and management, and you will see that over the last few weeks, we have touched on the first conceptual part of things. Theories of international development, we talked about how things are so iffy and that the debates are all over the place. How do you measure international development? Does it work? And again, you see that, it ranges from no, it does harm, all the way to yes, this is the saving grace. And we've also talked about careers in international development. Then we moved on to what is ICT4D. We had Ashita come give us a taste of what the research ICTD class is like in terms of talking about ICTD. We talked a lot about the conflicting theories and how, in the industry, at least in academia, it's still considered lost sheep. And we talked about the origins, the history, and future, particularly Heek's article, which is sort of interesting. And does it work? And then when we talked about mapping the ICT4D landscape, we did it together, and those things are actually online right now. So if you wanted to go and see, who are the usual suspects, etc. And then we're moving on to the next phase, and this is a good segue. It's sort of an overlapping, talking about the concept, but we're moving more into the applications per se, into the particular sectors, and some of the trends that are important. And so last week, we had Ruha, who showed us sort of a possible application out of many. And so what we will do this week, actually today, is to delve into very quickly the ICT policy side of things, appropriate technology and application. And the reason why we're doing this is just because these are just some of the new trends and the new buzzwords. And with that, look at all these things, right? I mean, international development is like that. About maybe 10 years ago when I first got in, the buzzwords were not really this. It was like rural participatory appraisal. It was, participation. It was about bottom up. Robert Chambers. That was the environment, gender. Those were the things that were on the forefront. Right now, you have all these buzzwords with ICTD. Particularly in regards to the application side of things, bottom of the pyramid, digital divide, rights-based approaches, social enterprise, all these things, open everything, big everything, Web 3.0, semantic web. So you see that, if you look at sort of where the trends are, there's always the trend setters and then the people who are early adopters. Right? And a lot of donors would be like, yes, I want you to design a project and then I want you to insert as many of these project activities as possible that will address these things. So that's what we're talking about, looking at some of the overriding issues as we go into the separate sectors of ICTD applications. So with that, I want to get a sense, hopefully you've read, at least browsed through the readings. The thing about the readings too is that I put supplementary readings which are for people that are interested in particular topics and want to read more about it. I try to keep each class to about 2 readings. This week you have about 3 readings plus 1 that is an older reading because we have not had any readings for the last 2 classes. So hopefully you have read that. With that in mind, tell me a little bit about these things. What are some of them? What have you read? Pick one. What are they? Priya?
So I read the second paper about financial sustainability in ICTD projects and
the bottom of pyramid?
Yeah, the bottom of pyramid audience mostly. And what was interesting to me was that how they were really trying to strike that balance between achieving their ICTD goal and also at the same time attaining financial sustainability, which I guess only less than 10% of that experiment that they did.
Yeah, the hybrid model that they talked about.
Only less than 10% of those entrepreneurs were able to achieve that.
Right, and that's, we will delve into that, but we were talking about the bottom of the pyramid, of which digital divide is a part of it, business models, etc., right? So that's fairly interesting. And Antonin, you were telling me too that you're reading a book on bottom of the pyramid, Antonin? It's okay. You were telling me you were reading a book. You want to share with your classmates?
I'm just at the beginning of the book, but the first chapter was about the fact we shouldn't have to consider poor as poor, but as real consumers, and it can be a win-win process to do that because on the one hand, poor people can buy things and maybe develop themselves and their life, and private companies can find another markets, can find another source of growth.
Yeah, and awesome. I mean, that came out from the whole bottom of the pyramid approach. We will talk about it later on in class today. But essentially, at some point, folks got frustrated with the whole, you're condescending to the poor. The poor actually can't afford to pay things. They will pay for things that are meaningful to them. There's no point in giving them free things for a variety of reasons, right? One is that free things are not usually treasured. Secondly, if we put a value on it, you actually can push forth some kind of development. And we'll talk about the bottom of the pyramid. But essentially, why is it called a pyramid, right? Essentially, if you look at the stratas of society, you have the middle class and then you have the upper class. A lot of the projects, sort of target these, and then the projects that target the bottom of the what is considered the bottom of the pyramid are folks that are like in rural areas without water, without electricity, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. But even then, there are demarcations here in terms of, the stratas of economics. And so the bottom of the pyramid folks are basically saying, well, you know what, if you provide things that they need, like electricity, they will pay for it. because it's important to them. The question would be finding that market. And so the business model here is you decrease the price, right? But then you increase the volume, because the argument is that there are so many people here. So even if you sold it at a fraction of what is currently the market rate of what you're selling to the middle class folks, you still can make your profit. So an example would be like the 99-cent songs, for example. Yeah, so, okay, so that's bottom of the pyramid, which we'll talk a little bit more. Anything else to add? I mean, like, these are some kind of the things that you see a lot these days in government RFPs. We want you to address this using a rights approach, and we want you to promote innovation, etc. Any other things before we move on to the details of some of these? Observations from the readings, what are they? Eric?
The open everything one, I was seemed very idealistic and I'm still like in the ether about what that really means, and trying to combine it with like other models for poverty alleviation, like participatory community-driven development stuff, and I just wasn't really clear how to make those ideas come to fruition. And I didn't even talk about open government stuff,
right?
Which I was surprised at. So that was just my overall.
Right, yeah, open government is conceptually under the governance angle, and so what it basically means is it points to transparency, right, which is one way of thinking about government. What these folks are talking about is really open everything. Transparency being one of them, but it's about processes, peer-to-peer production, the kind of things that the Web 2.0 and maybe even Web 3.0 can bring us, and that's why they're like, let's just have everything open. But, does open work most of the time? Maybe not. I mean, like, especially how do you combine this with kind of a business model? A lot of businesses' profits are actually based on their ability to get things copyrighted or patented. So, there's a lot of debates going on there. But yes, one of which is, what is open everything? Good observation. Okay, one or two more points, and then let's move on to bottom of the pyramid. Seema?
I thought it was amazing that in the Kerala program that is addressed in the bottom of the pyramid reading, they tried so hard to include entrepreneurs, and like they had applications, they chose the right entrepreneurs, and still most of them failed. And even the ones who were successful, they were only successful because they had targeted the people who can pay more, like the middle class, or people who were ready to pay for lessons. And they could only achieve financial sustainability when they targeted those people and just use the brand to reach out to the poor people.
Right.
Right. So I thought that was quite amazing because you hear about all this, like include entrepreneurs, make it an social enterprise, don't give in donations and all of that. And when you do that, people just take the liberty of doing that and then take it on, like start serving the middle class because that's where the money is.
Right.
So then that tension, I think that trade-off is always going to exist. And how do you, like, the paper really doesn't address, like, how do you find the middle ground, or how do you...
Right. Well, the paper recommends that we don't yet know the middle ground. Maybe some really smart researchers can go out and figure out what is the best practice, right? By the time that comes along, there'll be maybe yet another trend, who knows. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's so conflicting. Right? There's some really nice theories about the bottom of the pyramid, but in practice, it might or might not work. So, good observation, and we will be dwelling more into that Kerala project too. Also, the writings, the paper is from Kentaro, who wrote what is ICTD as a human right earlier, and also Isha Ray, who teaches they're both UC Berkeley. Kentaro used to be associated with us when he taught a class here, but Isha Ray is the person that's teaching the ICTD class next fall. Okay, so with that, so these are just things that are thrown out there right now, right? Mobile. Right, this is an appropriate technology. Appropriate technology, what does that mean? Do we use radio, TVs, et cetera, et cetera? On each of these, there's so many multiple debates. Big everything. Convergence. What's convergence? Convergence is and still is a big thing. Have you heard of this buzzword? Convergence. It appears in a lot of RFPs. Anybody knows technology convergence?
Well, I know economic convergence.
Sure.
means
Take a
It's the
step.
idea that basically technology can provide a way to leapfrog for developing countries to converge with developed countries economically.
Sure, yeah, and that is, well, the convergence that we use here is the technology itself, but the leapfrogging yet is another buzzword. You know, maybe it's not as trendy now as it was maybe 10 years ago. Convergence here talks about the convergence of technology. So basically, you know, if you look at the way that we assess, I would say, email right now, it's very hardware. It's mainly hardware independent, right? Everything is converging into something. So at some point, they're saying everything is going to be in just one device. It might be the Google Glass, but actually, in MIT or somewhere, they're actually doing research instead of the Google Glass. This is going to be contact lens. And then that would be the next phase, you know, and that's already being done. But then right now, they're actually trying to put some genetics or whatever into the iris so that you could actually have the entire thing converge there. So, you know, maybe that's the way the world is. But yeah, convergence is a big one, putting technology, you know, together. So out of all these, what we're doing today in class is we picked, you know, 3 things that are sort of the more popular ones. The bottom of the pyramid, the whole concept of innovation and appropriate technology, and that's from Hicks' article. And then we're also talking about, you know, open technology, which is another buzzword. And as well as ICTD policies. Policy is a big thing in getting more and more big in implementation, because what they're seeing is that these, you know, if you implemented a project for, say, a $500,000, you can affect maybe 200 people that might be using your app, etc. And what you see a lot more, I guess not pressure, but a lot more incentives are to see how you could contribute to the policy discussion and actually change policy so that it covers, you know, more people. So I want to talk very quickly about ICTD policies. You know, tell me a little bit. I know the APC. Okay, so the APC is essentially a nonprofit. Does anybody know what the APC policy handbook is? Some of you who have done ICTD policy might know. So in this day and time, you know, there are these things called model laws. You could actually type in, you know, ICTD, cyber laws, security laws, whatever, and then there could be a model set of laws you can plunk down. Now, traditionally, sadly, that's how the banks and the donors used to do it. They just go, okay, you know, the WWW has this really cool set of laws on this, adopt it, and that's what they have done. Then fast forward about 7-10 years later, the real picture on the ground is, well, the laws look really pretty, but it's not being reflected in implementation. So the ICT policy handbook, and that I did not assign as a required reading simply because it's very dense, and it's not dense, it's easy reading about the types of policies, and it's easy reading for a layperson, but it's still dense in terms of the categories. So if you remember, what are some of the broad categories of policy? Anybody even brush that article? Priya? What are some of the broad categories? Just look at the content page. You see that, you know, when it comes to policy, and you understand why your project needs to either conform to policy or integrate with the policy, or actually at least not run foul of the policies in the country. So if you look at policies per se, right, and this is ICTD policies, and we're talking about policies within countries, so they are national level policies. How did the APC distinguish among the different groups of policies that you can come out from ICTD? And this is all in the contents, right? One is broadcasting, right? So this is just big picture stuff. Don't worry too much about the details. Telecoms, right? ICT for development, and then of course they have one that's ICT for human rights. Although I don't know how this is kind of different. So I think that's how they distinguish the policy side of things. The question is, when we talk about ICT policies, you see that they run a whole gamut of broadcasting is like who owns the rights, who can broadcast certain things, who gets licensing and things like that, and there's usually a regulatory body. Telecoms, on the other hand, is similar, but it's not so much about the broadcasting of radio and TV, but it's more on the infrastructure itself. You know, who owns the fiber optic lines, how many can you lease, et cetera, right? And then this is the part that we're concerned about, the ICT for development and the ICT for human rights side of things, that they try to introduce the policies. So what I want to, this is just a broad stroke. I mean, there's a lot of more other things. Sometimes it's like ICT as industry, right? So sometimes there might be laws, and that's not really covered there, or maybe it's covered under ICT for development. ICT as an industry, how do we promote ICT innovation as an industry so that the whole industry would grow? So any feedback, thoughts on this? So the relevance to you, you know, as you do your little projects, or not little, but as you do your projects, you know, just think about all these things. Because very often, you know, you might run foul of certain things, or certain things are just not conducive to what's happening. And the fact is that a lot of these countries have perfect laws. Even if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, they would have perfect ICTD policies. The issue is that it is not being implemented. And what are the lessons learned? Anybody read the first? What are some of the lessons learned? Like why isn't it implemented well? What are some of the things and that's from the first reading. Eric?
Things have to be,
sorry. Go ahead.
Things have to be flexible, and you have to allow it to be dynamic.
Okay, tell us a little bit more.
Well, if you try to set into law or policy the exact way things will be, you'll be out of date in a year.
Right, yeah, it's flexible. And in fact, it says it's chaos often, right? And you just have to have this become a dynamic process. And that's one of the issues, that you cannot really just plunk down a set of model laws, which honestly was what ICTD donors were doing. The World Bank was just plunking down these model laws and just, you know, replacing Uganda with Ghana, for example. Okay. Any other lessons, Eric?
Yeah, it seemed like the overall theme was just being able to incorporate like all the various stakeholders in the process. And so that goes down to doing initial research to really understand who they are, then also having good communication between them all, and then, you know, giving the capacity for those who can't
Right.
participate at the same level, but who are yet still beneficiaries involved.
Yeah, and you know, in industry sometimes, I mean, especially right now, having done this for that long, stakeholders is such a painful word, you know, because it's almost like a chessboard. So that's why you can't really plunk down the laws. I mean, you have it very nicely in your repository, but there's no buy-in. And if there isn't, you know, the laws just look pretty, then they're not enforced. So yeah, the whole stakeholders notion is a hard one. And who is he saying are the stakeholders that at least you should keep in the context? Who are the people generally? Government, different branches.
Academics.
Sorry?
Academics.
Good. Anyone else? Grassroots folks. Yeah. So basically, the kitchen sink, right? You look at the context of that situation and go, well, you know, where are the politics and how do we play this chessboard so that everybody feels like they've come out winning? And that's sort of a stakeholder management strategy. And then they also made a distinction. You know, not only do you need to know your stakeholders, you need to be able to communicate with them. Any other observations? What are the lessons learned? Siri, and then Changgi?
That they have to build the capacity for the ICT.
Yep, capacity building. Right? And the funny thing is that if we take a look back and we say, well, you know, this is ICTD policies, but honestly, isn't this any type of policy and any type of development project, right? It comes back to the same old type of principles. You know, so a lot of the times when we think, okay, you know, the laws, sometimes in industry we think of laws like technology. You know, let's invent the new, nice, perfect ones, and then things will trickle down. But it never happens because these things are not within the foundation. Okay, anything else that they mentioned? I think they said that about 7 lessons or something like that.
They also talk about doing comprehensive research.
Doing comprehensive research, okay, so basically, you know, making sure that it's your needs assessment that is, just don't plunk down a set of laws without seriously seeing how it can be applied. And then of course you've got to play this entire chess game of making sure everyone's on board, they feel like they are the ones introducing it, etc., etc. Anything else? 1 or 2 more? Yeah.
Policy processes.
Policy processes, say a little bit more about it, and then tell us what you meant by that, or the team.
Well, they were talking about we need to ensure that the government or whoever, I think it also goes back to the stakeholders, that the government take ownership of if need be, of the policy process that will result in the project, and also legitimacy of the document that you are producing.
Right, the legitimacy, yes, exactly. It's sort of it is very tied to stakeholders and communications. A lot of this is really simply making sure that everybody feels like they have a voice. You know, you have 3 different, so you introduce a policy, you have these feedback sessions, you invite all your stakeholders, everybody feels like they have something to say, you have it 3 times around, you change the policy, and then you make everybody feel good. CD and Krista?
We were probably thinking the same thing.
The implementation. Okay, so yeah. Basically, being able to connect the dots between after you created the policy, made the policy, and then how do you implement it and carry out the implementation process. So
right.
That's basically saying.
And that is really interesting because that's the whole part that's been perturbing a lot of the practitioners. You know, if you look at any countries, right? Not even just ICT laws. You look at the criminal laws, you know, okay, you've got to wear a motorcycle helmet. Most of the countries, you have to wear a motorcycle helmet. That is in the law. How much is the fine? It's already there. But it's never been, it's really not implemented. Why not, right? And that's the whole part of the disconnect. Let me just show you, right? I mean, in my old course of work, it's messy because I used to do some policy work, and if you look at the whole coordination of how things work, right? I mean, these are all the lessons learned, but if you look at the first part of this, how is it done in content and institutionally? Okay, usually somebody comes in or some politician goes to an ICTD conference, and then it's like, wait a minute, wow, my neighbor has all these laws, and this is the new thing right now. Okay, now we need to do this in our own country. So what they try to do is that whoever who went there, right, sometimes they could be in the Ministry of Communications, right? Sometimes they could be in the Ministry of, maybe even in the Ministry of Science and Technology, right? And all these are different departments of, sometimes they could be in telecoms, although telecoms is usually it's the regulatory part of the Ministry of Communications, right? And then sometimes it could be a Ministry of Law, right? Some lawyer went there and say, wait a minute, wow, these are really cool. You know, we desperately need a set of cyber security laws. So you have these coordination problems and Ministry of X. So that's what happens when somebody comes in and then they start introducing a bill through whatever ministry, right? So this is fine and dandy because at the end of the day you think, well, you know, this really benefits the entire country. But in practice, what I've seen is that there's a lot of tough issues. You know, like in Bangladesh, Myrtle, the law couldn't pass because these folks were introducing one set, these folks were introducing another set. And so they were like, okay, no, I want my set to pass, the other person wants theirs to pass. It's so political in a lot of ways. And so you basically take this to the high level, the prime minister or the highest level. And so the old way of doing things is, it has been like that. So, okay, the Ministry of Law maybe might introduce cyber law, and then the Ministry of Communications might do some telecoms policy, right? But what happened was that this was very ad hoc. So at some point, after many years, the prime minister, at some point, there's no way to do e-governance. When I was doing a lot of e-governance work, the ministries were not talking to each other, and they were not even talking amongst themselves for political and also technology issues. The technology were not compatible. So at some point, the best way, so some folks were saying, well, you know what, you should not have this set of people introducing the ICT laws. Your ICT laws should come from here. So, you know, most countries like have a task force or however they do that so that it bypasses all of them in real life. It's still permutation, is a lot of combination and permutations about what has worked and what's not. But government coordination is always a huge issue. So any questions on this? Because I want to move on to bottom of pyramid.
Yeah, what have you seen as like the incentive for starting here, like at the top with these, the structure of going about things? Like, are like bilateral fundings attached to the existence of like good policy, and so they try to formulate that for, donor agencies or other governments, or is it like it looks good for the community and it's like, hey, look, we're like advanced because we're doing this technology stuff, and not really having a plan for applying it?
Right. Your question is, where does the incentive come from?
Yes.
Yeah. Any of the above. It could be World Bank, it could even be the Korean government, right? I mean, at some point, the Korean government were like, well, we really want to conquer the Asian markets. So what they did was they pumped in a lot of money for consultants to go into countries that they think they can have business with, and basically come up with policies for them that are very skewed towards, partnerships with the Koreans, and that's generally how the Koreans might do things. World Bank sometimes like pump in money. A lot of times really is these conferences. They go to the conference and they're like, wait a minute, there are these laws. I want to be cool. Sometimes it's an elections coming up, and somebody, wants to look good. Like, okay, we're really progressive, our country's going to leapfrog. So now we have all these laws and policies, and your businessmen can have open markets and things like that. Now, and sometimes, not often, but sometimes really it comes from a good place. Like, okay, I think that, like at some point Mongolia was really open. They had a prime minister that was very progressive, and he really wanted to do good for, it comes from that good place of really wanting to open up markets and wanting to do good for the country. So, it did come from that place, except that in my experience, at some point it got choked up because they had a person sitting here that was, and the people that are sitting here, usually they make them come from these different departments, so that's how we have stakeholder coordination, right? So they sit there, and he was really, really into digital passports. That was his big project, and he really wanted to do digital passports, even though Mongolians don't really travel and they're very rural. So what do you do with that? That's the reality of the world. Yeah. Any other questions on policies? Okay, so with that, just know, the relevance to you, like I said, is basically just to keep this big picture in mind, so that whatever you're doing, even if you are, let's say at some point you might be working with the Ministry of Labor, for example, to implement some kind of an act to say, okay, well, you have this little task force, and then you have a Ministry of Labor here, right? And I'm going to do this little app that would link low-level IT skilled workers with businesses that need it, and in an impact sourcing thing. Well, then your perspective would basically to understand the chessboard and to go, okay, oftentimes who's talking to who? If this guy's sitting here and I'm like, okay, well, can I actually get him to help put a policy out and say, yes, within the education curriculum, and so there's a Ministry of Education here, right? So maybe this might be your project idea, and say, well, I want at least this to be a part of an elective curriculum here for people to either do open source development or some kind of, as part of their extracurricular activities or however. So that's your chessboard that you stand back and you look, well, how do I make this entrenched in policy so that at least the belief is that your impact can be more lasting. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go to the bottom of the pyramid. So tell me a little bit more about the bottom of the pyramid concept. Now, I know some of you already mentioned. Krista?
So the idea is that there's this huge untapped market, this group of people who may not have much money, but there are so many of them that there's a lot of money that can actually be leveraged to create businesses that will be profitable for the business owners, and
Right.
also beneficial to these people by bringing them into the market.
Yeah, interesting. So we're coming back to this sort of diagram, right? And they're saying, well, let's tap into this market because this is a $1 billion market that generally has been sort of ignored, right? Any questions on the concept of the bottom of the pyramid? There's that book that Antonin is reading right now, and I put a cheat sheet in there because in the supplementary reading is someone has actually plunked down an entire summary by chapter of that book. So you can read a little bit more about it, but this essentially, like I said, the concept came up in about 2004 when it's sort of a backlash of, okay, all these all these development policies are not working. Remember those debates that we had, and so this goes back to the market side of things. So yeah, let's spend some time to talk about this, the India project, the Kerala project. Tell me, what is the project?
It's the IT education, like courses offered via franchising model. And people initially thought that it was like a government-sponsored plan.
Right.
And so a lot of people signed up initially, and then I think it's called Akshaya.
Yeah, Akshaya or something, right? Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the context. Why did they decide to start it here in Kerala, and why was that, why was there so much promise about this being the first place for that franchise model?
So basically, like even though Kerala had a good literacy rate, I think the skill set was not matching with the job industry. So basically, it was to elevate the economic elevation of lower classes. That was the goal.
Seema?
I think there was also a big part when they discussed politics. So Kerala is basically a very leftist, communist based state, and because of that, they have been lacking in socio-economic development. So they were always behind the country's GDP. There was not enough support for entrepreneurs. And most people were taking up like daily clerk type jobs because there was no support for entrepreneurship. So I think they chose Kerala because the government was just trying to get into liberal economics, and they wanted to expand the markets and stuff like that, and they were experimenting with a whole different bunch of models. And I think they chose the district because there were a whole bunch of migrant workers where the household had fathers which worked in Dubai or the Middle East as day laborers or whatever, and there were a lot of households that needed this e-literacy kind of program to help them have a second income or something like that.
What an ironic name, right? Illiteracy?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, great. And then that's the whole lessons learned, right? Like, let's understand this context, before we even delve into the types of the project in itself. Okay, so what were they offering? They were offering courses. The courses were sponsored. Right? So these were free. Or at least this was subsidized.
I think the first bunch of courses were free, and then you had to pay the equivalent of $10 to continue your education.
Right. And then tell me a little bit about where these courses reside. I mean, what about the centers and things like that? How is that concept like? Right? Because these were like courses that were conducted out of the internet centers.
Yeah.
Right? So what about the centers? Were the centers supported too? How did that work? The IT centers?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the centers were like the infrastructure wise they were supported. I'm pretty sure they were. So every time you offered a course to a person, the government would pay you a certain amount for the first course. I think it was $1 or $2 or something like that. So per person you would earn for the course delivered. But I think one of the entrepreneurs also complained that there was no subsidy in terms of infrastructure. So you would have your own center, you could set it up, you could use the government brand though, of calling it the Akshaya Center.
Right, so what is offered is the brand, which became a controversy to begin with, right? It's like, do I even need that? But then what you're looking at is they're using some little money from here to subsidize maybe the IT centers, the running of the IT center. I'm drilling down into sort of the business model. If you, Shelby, you had something to say? No. Okay. Anything else to add? So what else about the project? What happened? Did it work? Did it not work?
For some social entrepreneurs who signed up, it worked very well to kind of give the promotion for their newly established center. But for people who are already kind of popular, that gave a very negative impression about the center, that these people are just offering like almost free courses.
Right, and yes, and so it's interesting, right? I mean, the thing is that when we step back, let's even understand what is the business model here. It sounds like the government is basically saying, well, we are holding this sort of innovation competition. If you bid successfully for this, we would allow you to have these courses that we've designed using our own money, and you can offer it to them, but you have to offer it to people at a sort of a rural rate, right? So that's the sort of thinking behind this. And so the question is, well, did it and did it not work? So Rachita, you were saying yes and no.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So okay, let's start with no, because we're looking at a lot of no's. What happened there?
So there's this interview summary of one of the established centers. So earlier, that guy was kind of giving the courses which were quality courses at market, like compared to market price. But after he signed up for Akshara, and people started having that perception that all the courses are free, and they were not willing to pay like premium price for the quality content.
Right, and that's a whole problem too. I mean, with international development, right? I mean, it comes back to the whole bottom of the pyramid concept that's trying to address. That's like, well, anything that's free is usually not valued that much, but anything that is, that you charge for something, that in a private rate, usually people think that that's better. Ironically, in this situation, the fact that it was a government subsidized project actually sabotaged the project in itself, because it was a stigma. It was like, oh yeah, government subsidized means poor people, right? I mean, we have this concept too. Right? Think about a government clinic. Who wants to go there? A government dentist, even worse, right? We just have this concept, and that's not any different than. So what's interesting is that, in the article, when they did the research, they said, well, we found 3 groups of people, and that we can use to analyze, right? Those people that viewed this project from a social kind of, well, maybe I shouldn't call it social, using a social goal as sort of the major lens, and then the folks that actually use profit and business goals, right? And then he said, okay, well then there's this group let's call them the hybrid group, right? And this is where they say, well, these are the 10% of people that might have made it work, right? Am I correct? That's what he's saying. So tell me a little bit about what were the things that were not working for these people. So Regina, what you were saying was that, well, I want to offer this for profit, but the problem was that, no one wants to pay the low price. Ironically, right? Because they see this as sort of a government cheap, low quality course.
And again, there was another point that the course content, it was not well aligned with what the market needs were. Like, it was mostly for people who were just learning computer skills, basic computer skills, and they're not going to use it ever in any kind of job scenario. So
okay, so it doesn't feel a need, right? It doesn't feel, well, even if I think this can fall under here. It doesn't feel a real need, right? People wanted computer courses, but these might not necessarily be the courses that would give them a job. So even from a social goal, you might be addressing a problem with a wrong solution. Anything else? What else did he say? That these folks that come in, and this is critical, right? Why is this even relevant to you? As you go about your sahes or your apps, you want to go, well, you know, I want to be a social entrepreneur, but there's this big tension, right? And what are the lessons learned from here? Krista?
Oh, I wanted to add one thing to the social goals that I found really interesting, was that since it was a government-sponsored project, people expected more government support.
Mm-hmm.
So people who were socially driven and considered themselves kind of deliverers of a government service thought that the government would make sure they succeeded.
Yeah,
Right.
they thought it was low risk.
Sorry, say that again?
They thought it was low risk, so they thought there will obviously be a profit. Like they assumed that the business model will work regardless of what their capabilities were.
Right, okay, so it's low risk, that's what they think, but then, you know, this is still moot, right? And then, Krista, what you're saying is that then on top of that, the model lent itself into a tension with these folks, because people are coming and saying, wait a minute, you know, you're neither here nor there, right? I'm coming to your, say, your government dentist center, and I'm expecting certain things, but you're not giving me all these other things for free, right? If I wanted to get an injection before my extraction, I need to pay the market rate. You know, but that's not really government either. So that's the need for government support, and that has a lot to do with the context, right? I mean, it's traditionally seen as, you know, very government dependent, very state driven, and so they look at things and go, we don't really understand this, and so we don't really trust this. Okay, anything else? What else did these people find?
I think the high.
Sorry, Priya and then Seema?
Yeah, so I think that the socially driven entrepreneurs, they envision this whole Akshaya project to be more of a social welfare program, and their goal mainly in running the franchisee or the center was to spread awareness about e-literacy and not really make profits. So even like one of their entrepreneurs even said that even though his center shut down, he was satisfied that he was able to spread that awareness.
Right. Because I think
so for him, the ICTD goal was more important than being financially sustainable.
Right. So here's the problem, right? Because what is the goal? Is the goal for profit or is it for social? And you see that there's a lot more tension in implementation than it is in the theory side of things. I'm sure that we see that too, right? Even Facebook, right? I mean, is it social? Is it, you know, business? And I don't know. Yeah. What about the hybrid models?
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about her. So the persona that they used over there, she actually, so I think she has both. She has social goals and profit-seeking goals also. So what she does is she uses the brand and then she connects it to their needs of wanting to fill government forms and wanting to get information about the government, and sort of becomes like this center for the government in the rural area. So she becomes like the gateway to information about the government, because she knows so much about the government initiatives, or she can just look them up on the internet. And that's how the people got tied in with her. So then she could create that recurring relationship where they would come back for information or come back to learn more about how to fill government forms online or something like that.
Right.
So
that's cool, because what she did was that the hybrid group was to actually identify a niche where there was a niche that people were willing to pay at least, and that it was directly tied into that, you know, government welfare thing. So on the marketing side of things, it was clean, right? And that was one of the reasons why that hybrid group, or at least this particular person, seems to have made it work. Now, I mean, and honestly, these are the things I've seen in practice too. As I always mention to you, the telecenter projects. You know, we see this in real life tension. When we try to get NGO people to run a telecenter, it always goes into this pot. You know, they don't really feel good about charging people market rate. They don't want to introduce courses that can make them money if it doesn't address that target audience. You know, and they're not business savvy. And then if we got the entrepreneurs to run them, then they care about profits, right? If gaming is a big thing, they would do gaming as opposed to the social goals of, you know, introducing rural folks to whatever your goal might be, political information or things like that. Yeah. Any other lessons learned? Why is the hybrid group, you know, has some potential?
also because, like as Seema mentioned, the persona that they have used, she sort of her business model differentiated between the user group. where she charged subsidized fees for the low-income groups, and she charged the normal rates or rates that could be financially sustainable.
Right, and actually this is if you study this part, right, I mean this whole thing could be an entire business class on social entrepreneurship and what works, and people have like studied this to death. But this is one of the things that they basically call, subsidies from one group to another. And people have done it in a variety of ways. Like a lot of the times, a new model that I've also seen is that, okay, if you buy this app, you pay twice the rate, and then you are able to allow somebody else to use this app from a developing country, for example. So yeah, this is a fairly popular model. Anything else, Christina?
I was going to actually add to this and bring up this business model, because I had a question about this, because it seems to me that it is a popular model, but I'm confused about, because in this case, it's these individuals that make the decisions, right? Who's poor enough to be subsidized and who's well off enough to subsidize. And it seems to me that there is a great danger for nepotism and just kind of, it seems strange to me that it's an individual who's making the decision, because so many personal relationships can come in. So how can this model, how do we avoid falling into this trap?
Well, maybe you can't. I think that, people have so many different permutations and combinations of how this works. My guess is that, when the government runs that competition, there's some criterion that they have to fulfill, whether it's by income or by village, where they say, okay, people from this village are considered low income. But you're right, not a lot of the criteria are that clear, and anything can be led to abuse. I think the thing usually, at least from my personal experience, is that because this is so community-based, you find that there's a lot more pressure from the community. People would be like, wait a minute, you're using your brother-in-law's computers, you're buying things from your brother-in-law's shops. And that might be okay, because in practice that's an okay context for them. But other people might be like, wait a minute, I am actually paying government, market rates for this when I should be getting, say, free services. So I think you're right. It's a very tough balance in practice. I've not really seen it work generally.
But is it sort of common to use the poverty line defined by the government itself for that country? For example, in India, they have a set poverty line below which they get issued subsidized fuel or subsidized cash crops.
It depends on how the project was run, right? It depends on what was in your contract and what was in the RFP. A lot of times it depends on who's sitting there and actually drafting that RFP. So it depends on how they defined it. A lot of the times I don't think that they use a blanket income thing. I mean, in the US there is, because you can actually verify income. Somebody can say, okay, give me your W-2 pay stubs, give me your tax records. But if you're looking at these folks, there's no way you can verify their income. You just get a sense that, yes, I think they're poor, versus I don't think they're poor. And it's very, very much community driven. That's at least my sense. Yeah. Krista?
Yeah, it's such an interesting subject, targeting, and the benefits of an outsider choosing who is poor and who isn't is the objectivity. But there's such inaccuracy there. And what if the poverty line set by the government doesn't actually match local perceptions of what it is to be poor or not poor?
Yeah.
So sometimes maybe this person will be selecting in a more personal way, but that person also has more information about local conditions.
And that's true. Let me give you an example about, let's say, legal aid, right? Legal aid is sort of a weird hybrid. Because if you think about law, or even medicine, but law is more of it. Most of the time, these are the folks that go to the lawyers, right? Because these are the folks that can actually afford them. And then in legal aid criteria, in a lot of countries, including the United States, there is such a low income criteria that really you're addressing these folks, right? And you're saying, okay, somebody that is right at this very, very bottom side of things can get access to legal aid. And that's the whole problem then. You know, you're trying to address the bottom of the pyramid, but then the legal aid policies, really, a lot of this falls out of the system. And you feel it. I mean, you know, even in the US, what I've often been told to me is it's really good to be really very, very rich or very, very poor. It's being in the middle class that sucks. You know, so, and that's true. The older I get, I realize like, wow, you know, these older folks that don't have property or whatever, they get these nice government housing. I just visited one of my friends' parents, and it's like really nice government provided housing, et cetera, because they were really poor. But the people who are like, yes, I do own one house, but then I don't have enough room or whatever, they fall out of the system. So yeah, I mean, it's not a perfect system. Okay, anything else to add about what is making this work? And lessons learned for your own projects?
Maybe just one little thing. The hybrid group is only, I think, 10%.
Yeah, if at all.
Very telling.
It's very hard. I mean, you know, with one project, and you've seen in social entrepreneurship, they have, you go, well, how do you hybrid this? Because people that belong here are very different than people that belong here, right? And so that's why there's this new education, I guess the background that is actually teaching people how to be social entrepreneurs. But until we get a new generation of those, right now it's just a guesstimate. And in the way that with run projects, we often go, well, what should we do? You know, maybe let's have this person be the managing director and this person be on the board. You know, let's both of them be executive directors, co-executive directors of one project. It's so difficult, and there's no blanket template that works. It's always contextual. You know, that's what we noticed. And what makes some things work? There's no consistency. Most of the time, it's the person itself, how they do things amongst themselves, and what is their belief system. But yeah, it's interesting. Seema?
I think the hybrid group was only 10%, but even the profit earning group earned a lot of money, and they were actually successful. So, we can criticize them saying that they didn't achieve their development goals,
right?
But they actually might have spun out other successful entrepreneurs, or they actually empowered some people to actually start their business or get jobs or whatever. So it's really hard to measure that impact, and I think they don't go into much detail about how the profit-seeking group enable people or empower people at all. They focus more on the hybrid group because they think that's closer to the development goals of the project.
Right.
And to think of it, like even the government later on, when they started the second round, I think they mandated being an entrepreneur as a requirement. Earlier it was just being educated to secondary +2 and having some computer knowledge. And now they added an extra requirement saying that you have to be an entrepreneur or shown some sort of business skill before starting it. So we can undermine the profit group, but I think that's a key factor. And I think it might be more, I don't know what percentage of the group it was, but I think they might have done some things that we might have gone under the radar.
Right, and that's a good point, right? Remember, Ashita and I were having this sort of same discussion. It's like, well, unintended consequences. It's like, what is the goal, right? Is the goal to say, well, you know, I want to reach, 400 rural people have increased their computer knowledge by X%, right? And then the other goal is, okay, I need to have made, at least a turnover of X dollars per year, right? And nobody has actually defined this in detail, but most of the time, and this is us development folks coming in and going, well, this one doesn't really matter that too much as this. But you're right, then Ashita, because that's the goal of the proposal, right? In the project, it would be like, okay, you're supposed to be reaching this folks. They're not necessarily telling you have to make X amount of money a year or influence how many entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
But then from a researcher's point of view, you would come in and say, hey, there's nothing wrong with this, and let's see what are some of the impact.
Yeah, and because even that guy mentions that he was teaching computers to the older generation who will never go back and use a computer ever. So you could reach 400 rural people, but are they actually going to use it?
Exactly, yeah, and then this comes back into impact questions, right? Okay, reaching somebody, is that what we measure? Is scores what we measure? Is what they do with their lives that matter? And then this becomes a philosophical kind of question. Okay, any last words on the BOP and its implementation in practice, at least using this one project?
So this isn't related to the reading, but it's something that's always kind of confused me about bottom of the pyramid.
Welcome to the club.
Bottom of the pyramid as a market only makes sense if you believe very strongly in market forces to improve lives, I think. But if you believe strongly in market forces, then why hasn't the invisible hand already come to open up these markets, right? I think there's kind of a conceptual disconnect there, whereas, I don't know, it's always confused me.
Well, and it is confusing because folks, that there are so many different types of arguments, right? If you look at the original debates, like Prahalad, who came up with the concept in 2004, he's basically saying, most of the time, we forget about this population because we don't think they have money, you know? And we're reminding you guys, entrepreneurs, to look at them because they do pay for power, they pay for their mobile phones, you know, they pay rent, they pay, you know, for things. And in fact, this group pays proportionally more, most times, than the other groups. So why not target them? And it all came about also because of the microfinance movement, right? Where they say, hey, wait a minute. And this was, if you put yourself back in the mid-1990s, nobody believed in microfinance for this group, right? They were saying, well, this group, they won't repay. You know, actually, they are going to squander the money. They don't have the knowledge for that. And they're not going to be able to afford the market interest rate. And then, you know, 15 years later, that has been shown to be not true because this group actually has the highest level of repayment rates. Their interest rates are generally way higher than market because, you know, generally people don't want to lend to them. They're considered high risk. So from there, that's why it's like, wow, if microfinance can work, so can everything else. You know, so no, we don't know. You know, and this, in fact, I think within the article there was a call for more research because we don't know what works and what doesn't. Okay, Eric and then CD and Krista.
Well, I think, just to answer that a little bit, I mean, there's a visible hand on the market, but what other things are in place where it's working, and there's a regulatory framework in a lot of countries that enables the market to do its thing and not even take advantage of, you know, concentration of power and all that stuff. And so, and you know, it's really hard to like reach the very poor as well. And so there's a higher cost in like the market and its reach. And so
yeah, well that's true. And then added to that is the opponents of international development, right? A lot of them are saying, well, you're skewing the markets here. We can't compete with you no matter whether or not we have a business here because you're giving these products for free. CD, and then Krista?
Did you want to respond?
Oh, no. Thank you so much.
My question is more, I don't know, it's more like trying to bridge the gap kind of thought process because I feel that, you know, the bottom of the pyramid projects increase inequality, in my opinion, to some extent, because I mean, yeah, you're targeting them, you're pulling them up, but for businesses that I guess are not social entrepreneurship, assuming that social entrepreneurship means low profit or break-even kind of strategy, even though that's not all that it means. I know there are different definitions, but assuming that people are making lots of profit from it and then you're also helping the people at the bottom of the pyramid, I think that the people who benefit, at least the entrepreneurs out there, benefiting more, and it just keeps on extending this inequality gap between them. So I don't know, you're maybe alleviating poverty, but you're increasing inequality. I don't know, how do you bridge that gap for me? That's the big
I don't know, and that's why I'm leaving it to the new generation. I honestly don't know. I mean, I think it's such a big challenge because there's so many debates, and then at some point you become pragmatic, right? You go, okay, what is a project that would just allow me to pay my staff, you know, and then that's where you go. But it's extremely hard to figure out this model. In my last project, when I was in my last job, I was running an Access to Justice nonprofit, and what we were trying to do was instead of legal aid, right? And this is that model. Instead of legal aid, we were trying to come up with this kind of bottom of a pyramid model where we say, okay, you know, if you fall out of the legal aid parameters, then what we do is that we try the 99-cent iTunes model, right? Which is to say we go for high volume and low cost, very much like the Walmart model. But we had a lot of issues implementing this project. You know, one of which is the resistance of the lawyers. Another one is you do see a lot of issues with regards to, you know, paralegals, for example, that are really trying to target this group, but having competition from the a Dutch NGO that I was running that is much more efficient. Is that driving them out of business? So there's a lot of philosophical, moral issues with development. That honestly I haven't answered. Yeah.
Guess you can't retire yet then.
Oh, no. Like I said, I'm just passing the baton to the next generation, and then I'll be on a beach, and you'll come and tell me the answer to life. Okay, great. So again, standing back, how does this matter? Again, just think of it as a trend. When you're in the industry, whatever you're doing, just keep tabs of what the trends are. There's a lot of things going on, like the long tail, new business models. It's a lot of new ways of connecting the dots, and I think that's the new kind of learning that your generation will be coming to, taking a lot of information and trying to connect the dots rather than the traditional type of learning that we've done, like, okay, bottom pyramid, plumb, that's one model. So moving on, let's talk about what is he saying is appropriate technology as, because that's yet another buzzword, right? You have to implement appropriate technology and innovation, and this innovation thing is a big thing right now. What are some of the things he's saying? In terms of what are some of the quick points? Because this is sort of an old article, not an old article, but something that we've read before. What are some of the big takeaways without dwelling too much into the details? Let's do 3 or 4 quick ones. I'll take a calculated guess. You had to write an article that suggests, given what you know about innovation and appropriate technology, what do you think are some of the points that you would make?
Using devices and things that are already saturated in the markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole convergence piece, or the new, sometimes it's called new and old technologies, or it's also called convergence, right? And this is using, the old things, the TV, radios, sometimes even satellite radios, walkie-talkies. In Nepal, one of the most successful projects I've ever run was there was an internet with repository of certain different policies that were to be shared with local folks, but there was such a low penetration of technology that the project design was having a DJ basically an hour a day just web surfing and reading to everybody else what the web surfing is. Like, oh yeah, on the home page, and this is the front page, the government is announcing that now fire hydrants need to be 15 feet away, from the main door as opposed to 10 feet. Any questions? And then some people will call in, and then this DJ would actually type the question into the website. So, you see this kind of extension of combination of new and old technologies. Yeah, anything else? What else are we looking at as a trend? Lawrence?
To be honest, I haven't had a chance to go over reading it, but just looking at the question and thinking about it, I would want the people trying to innovate, use technology, to look at the needs of people on the ground and try to understand how the technology that exists can be used for those needs.
Right. Okay. Great. Yeah. And this is a good point. He talks a lot about, really looking at the needs of the people, and then if you actually read the paper, you will see that he's talking about new innovation models. I think we talked about this before previously in class when he was talking about the pro-poor. Remember that? Pro-poor, the para-poor, and then the poor-poor, right? Per-poor, right? Where it's like, well, at some point in time we were designing for the people, then now we should design with the people, and maybe in future, I think the people should be designing for themselves. What does that look like? Huh?
And just to illustrate an interesting example, I know, for example, that people using cell phones in developing countries use it often as lights, and that rather than, in addition to for phone calls. And I think most people here who think of using a cell phone as a flashlight because we have electricity, so.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And whenever I'm in Africa, I actually use my cell phone as a flashlight, not as a cell phone, simply because it's Verizon and I cannot get a SIM card over there. So it's actually just a flashlight. Okay, anything else? Yeah, think about like what might that look like? And again, the thing is, as you go about doing your projects, this is what you would consider, right, as you do your design.
So accessibility and interaction issues.
Sorry, say that again?
Accessibility, like how people
Yep.
can access the
Accessibility, but basically what is he's saying now, instead of accessibility in terms of building telecenters and plonking down infrastructure, that kind of thinking is moving towards kind of a user design, right? All the things that we learn in high school. User design, needs assessment, making sure that things can be interactive, right? So as you go about designing your apps, just remember that's what he's predicting, or at least the industry is saying that should be done. Anything else?
I think he also talks about impact assessment and sort of taking the findings into your existing project and keep on improving upon it.
Right, impact assessment, and we will get into this as a part of our project life cycle, right? Because you finish a project life cycle, it feeds back into your needs assessment. Anything else? So the thing is that if you read it, you can see that a lot of these things that they're talking about, actually the iSchool sort of have jumped on board too, because that's, in fact, Heeks is the person that has the first ever ICT4D master's program at the University of Manchester. So, accessibility, language, he was talking about language, using a lot more audio and video as opposed to text. So if you look at all these things in his article, that's what he's talking about. What is appropriate technology? It's no longer the telecenters, the infrastructure, etc. Let's focus on the applications. Let's make them, appropriate to the people, fulfill their needs, and actually have designs that make sense. Got that? So it's actually an interesting read. I just like it because it's kind of more progressive. Okay, any last words on this? I want to move on to the last section on open everything. Okay, so what is openness? And Eric has a good point. I mean, what is it? I don't know. What do you understand is open technology? Or open everything?
Free information that people can change.
Say that again?
Information that is free and where people can participate in the modification of the content.
Okay, content that is free, right? And then participation in some way or another, one of which is by participation in creating, right? Or remixing. Like the TED Talks where you could actually now remix videos. And other ways. Yeah. And what else? Right? Actually, the openness comes from the world that we live in right now, right? I mean, we're looking at, wow, look at all this education information that's free. Look at all this, media, right? That's at no cost and free and all that. Why can we not adapt this to development? So it just comes from that kind of thinking. Right? Now, again, you realize that sure that the proponents are all very idealistic about this.
Also, it talks about the shift in power and control. So,
shift in power and control. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I just glanced through it, but overall, the new initiative by Khan Academy, that kind of made me think in terms of this whole shift. The flip side classroom, which Khan Academy is coming out with Stanford, that's like taking the control out of the traditional, hierarchical classroom from whatever is provided right now, and giving it in the hands of the student to create the content. So that kind of shifts about.
Yeah, Chandy?
They also talk about how development or innovation should be BOP, driven by the beneficiaries or something.
In the openness article? Yeah, I mean, it's, but that basically, you have more participation and voice, right, from people from the developing countries. So Yeah, and I wanted to talk too a little bit about, and that's a great point, Chung. And Rashida, your point about shifting power and control, I mean, that's sort of the premise of the internet to begin with, right? And so what they're saying is that, well, internet 1.0 is good, internet 2.0 is even better right now, and 3.0 is going to be like so dynamic because, you know, it shifts in power and control. I mean, think about it, right? That you're talking about the open higher education. I mean, that's how business models are being disrupted too, because there's so much information out there. You don't necessarily need to pay, you know, atrocious tuition to come to UC Berkeley, right? Like all the open courseware and things like that. Yeah. And anything else about openness? And I want to remind, you know, everyone that openness is sort of a buzzword, but there's no real definition to it. You can talk about openness in terms of development, right? So you like open source. Right? And open source in itself is not necessarily free. Again, there's a lot of like levels of debates. Right? You can talk about open processes, right? How do you develop your open process in terms of participation, etc. You can talk about an open product, you know, a product that you have designed that you then, you know, release as open. You can talk about, you know, content. Creation of, like, for example, Wikipedia, for example. So there's a whole bunch. If you read the open literature, there's a lot of, again, debates about what exactly is open development. But unfortunately, outside of academia, the practitioners have sort of pounced upon this and say, you know, openness is good. So design a project that is open, right? And then if you read the article, there are some things that, you know, that are not that good about it. What are those one or two things that was mentioned in the article? Right. Because again, you're looking at this whole spectrum, right? Like, wow, this is fantastic, to wow, this is terrible. What are some of the pragmatic criticisms about this open theory? Just take a step.
Well, I think financial sustainability as well.
Financial sustainability? Oh yeah, nobody has actually found a business model, right? So the criticisms is financial sustainability. Even the MOOCs courses and all those things, they're still sponsored right now in Stanford, and all that is trying to, if you look at MOOCs, there's now two camps. You know, I think MIT is with Stanford or something. No, MIT is with UC Berkeley. Essentially, all these universities are grouped into two camps, right? One is the social entrepreneur. Where's my diagram? One is the social goals one, which is we should not be charging and this should be provided free. Another one, I think Stanford is in it, together with one or two other ones, where it says, well, we think that at some point we should be making a profit. We still don't really know what is the business model, but we believe in this. And so they've come up with certain things to try, like, okay, you know, it's free if you want to access it, but if you want a certificate from us, then you pay, you know, or it's free for the first 2 courses you take, but after that, then you start paying. So they're experimenting with that as well. So yeah, that's one. What's another thing that might not be good with openness?
Cultural imperialism is something that, I mean, when I was working on the blog post, that kind of came again and again, especially in the context of MOOCs. It was like all the courses are typically delivered for developed countries, and like not many are available for developing world right now.
Okay, yeah, so criticism is that as of now, the openness is still fairly one way, right? It's developed by the first world for the developing world. So we're bumping back into the first world idea. And one big thing, just to wrap up the class, is, for example, in the openness, when Singapore, you know, when I was born, Singapore had a GDP that was lower in Cambodia, that was lower in Uganda, and that was 40-some years ago. Today, it's about number 3 in GDP, right? And then they call Singapore the Asian tigers, together with Taiwan and Hong Kong. And one of the things that talked about is it's because they're not open that created that development. Because there was good policies that was implemented top-down, and things went smooth. Imagine if people were allowed to petition, et cetera, that would just create chaos. Too much openness is not good. So that's always been the kind of, you know, Asian thinking about development, which of course the first world doesn't necessarily buy. So with this, what I want to wrap up is, you know, as you go about your own projects, this is especially the ones that are doing, you know, apps, and even folks that are doing business models. Think about all these trends, because, you know, I actually had a group exercise, which we're not going to carry out right now, but if you think about, and this is very typical, and this is what I've been seeing a lot in my work right now. Right? I took an example. I took Christina's project, and you see that what's happening right now is there are all these innovation things going on, and the RFP evaluation of your project is all these things that we talked about. How do you integrate this with your ICTD policy? How do you, what kind of activities do you build in with openness of your app? And how do you actually ensure the appropriate technology and promote new innovation models? And come up with a business plan that utilizes the bottom of the pyramid model. So there are permutations and combinations of this together with all of the other buzzwords we've heard. Right? RFPs are now looking more and more like this. Like, okay, yeah, here's a project, but build in some project activities that tell me how to do this. How do you converge? How does your technology project converge with the things that are already happening in the field, etc. So I just want to wrap up, but what I would like you to do as you think about your own projects and you are writing your papers or thinking about how to develop a project is just to keep these trends in mind, and keep following the trends, because no doubt there will be more things that are coming up. So, okay, with that, any questions on the trends? On Wednesday, we will actually be moving on to the applications itself. There are 2 readings. But before we wrap up today's class, any big questions, concerns on today's topics or beyond? Okay, cool. So see you on Wednesday then. Just 2 readings.